We're back to S1.
We're now
Yesterday
live.
we are live and we are back here. We are going back to the discussion of S1 committee. I'm trying to move us towards a decision on this one. Today we're going to hear about the baseload renewable power portfolio requirements. And we have Doug Smith, who is Chief Public Supply Executive, Green Mountain Power. So Doug, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Hi, folks. Yeah, thank you for having me. So just briefly by way of background, I'm one of the leaders in GMP's power supply area, meaning that my teammates and I try to procure power sources as low cost as we can on behalf of our electric customers. And increasingly, that role is also oriented to making that power supply more and more renewable. So it's about being really aligned with a lot of the state's long-term goals in that regard. For today, so that's my background. For today, a couple things. I'm here basically to, I hope, help with a couple of clarifications to the bill that, as I recall it, made a significant amount of progress last year, but didn't make it all the way through before our friend COVID hit. So I'm working from, I believe there's a handout on your committee webpage that just appeared like in the last half hour or hour, but by way of intro, that's what I'll be referring to. And these clarifications or proposed amendments are basically, GMP worked on these with a few folks, the Public Service Department, the representatives of the Rygate plant, I think Vermont Electric Cooperative, and I apologize if I'm forgetting someone else here, but they're basically around just a couple of themes. One is modernizing the statute to reflect the current market terminology that the Rygate plant and others work within. It's been a decade or so since this was done the first time. And the other is really support, in that context, a couple of things that basically support what I would call making sure that the bill and the plant's operation work to most cost effectively serve the needs of Vermont customers. So it's essentially about tuning. These are fairly on the margin and about clarification, but they're mostly tuning for those two goals, just to make the bill hopefully work better. And I just say going in, I appreciate the work of Mr. Martland to listen to us and help try to make sensible amendments in that regard.
Okay.
So if it's all right, Madam Chair, shall I go through the particular amendment now?
I think Luke is going to walk us through, but tell us just basically what you're upgrading, what this is going to change.
At the highest level, it doesn't change the overall structure of what's proposed in the bill or what was the current power purchase agreement, 10 years associated with the previous statute. It's basically the same form. It's just in a few places adapting, for example, to products and services that didn't exist or didn't have any value before in the electricity market. I think you all might have heard some testimony on renewable energy attributes, for example. That's an example.
Well, I think that's a question. What role does this play in GMP's power portfolio? I mean, does this play a necessary role in your renewable energy portfolio?
Well, I would say, first, I'm approaching this from the perspective of my understanding that that the committee and a number of the earlier witnesses that have gone have laid the foundation for why it's sensible for Vermont to pursue. an arrangement like this, I'm basically hoping to help make it better and make sure it works for customers. In terms of background, this plant provides a few percent, I believe 3 or 4% of annual energy supply. So it is not a large one for us, but it's one of a portfolio that we try to operate to minimize costs for our customers. I don't know if that was too general.
Okay. Senator Hardy, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Mr. Smith, for being here. I think it would be helpful for me anyway, to hear, Green Mountain Power presumably wants to get the best rates for its customers as possible. And Senator McDonald doesn't think so, but I'd like to hear this.
Senator McDonald doesn't have the floor.
Whether or not that is true, and if it is true, how does this plant fit into it? Because my understanding, and I could be wrong, is that the power from this plant is actually at a higher cost. And my second question is on the renewable energy. Does this, as Senator Cummings was saying, fit into your renewable energy portfolio and in a beneficial way? Or is it just you're fitting it in because you have to? Or is it because you want to, if you know what I mean?
I guess I would say a couple of things. There are a few things in your question. Let's see how I do. First, I think you alluded to the cost of power from this plant being somewhat above market, or a phrase to that effect. You are correct about that, in that this bill, as you know, does not set a specific price, X cents per kilowatt hour here, but rather it instructs the PUC to balance a number of factors and to set that price. If we use the current PPA as a guide, this energy is somewhat priced above the wholesale market. It does have some features in terms of a steady output. We're going to talk a little bit, I think, about dispatchability, the ability to reduce output at certain times. And there's a diversity of technology that have some positive features to it. But we're really approaching this today on the understanding that this is a resource that is generally wanted, not just for power reasons, but for the other ones. I wasn't here for all the witnesses, but for the other reasons involving state economic activity, the forest, and so forth. So it's a total package. Yeah.
Well, I guess, thank you for that, but I guess I wouldn't make that assumption yet. We're still in conversations about whether or not that is what the committee actually thinks. I think there's some differences of opinions and on some of those points. And so that was what I was trying to get at is it an important part of your renewable energy portfolio? And how do you justify to your customers paying a higher price? Do we have other options? And so that's sort of,
I guess in clarifying, or a little bit more with your question, a little more squarely in my mind, I guess I would say, for a sense of scale, well, I guess first I would note that building a portfolio of power sources doesn't require everyone to have the lowest sticker price. It's a mix, it's a balance, and there is diversity considerations. And as I said, the profile of power output when it produces and how much affects the worth of that power to that we see Green Mountain Power on behalf of our customers in the power market. So it's not just the sticker price, but for a sense of magnitude, we're probably talking plus or minus one. If the PPA price under this bill is set at approximately the level that the existing PPA that is in its later years now, if it's set about the same level, we're talking about order of magnitude something like a 1% plus or minus upward pressure on our retail rates compared to what I might call the least cost other thing. And there are some considerations, as I mentioned, to be balanced against that. As a power supply leader at GMP, I'm not arguing against this resource because of those positive features. And I also know that there are some other considerations, including the state economic activity, forest, and such that I mentioned earlier, that puts it probably within the reasonable realm of alternatives. I hope that's a little more specific.
Doug, when you talk about least cost or available power, my impression is you'd buy that off the grid.
Yes, I guess the lowest, the absolute lowest cost that we could get would typically be on a short-term or spot market basis from any power plant in the region, including if they're burning natural gas or oil or whatever. As I led with earlier, we have aspirational goals that we're going to meet to buy cleaner than that. Yes.
We started out this whole process for, hey, we were telling utilities that in order to develop and maintain renewable energy sources, locally sourced, that we were asking you to buy above the market. And, that has changed over time, but the goal was to develop and, help give them the financial stability they needed to make the capital investment necessary to build either these plants. Hydro dams are kind of out, and we have been trying to limit hydro. But solar was the big one. Solar in the month of November probably didn't do a lot. My understanding was that places like, and wind has been a mixed bag, that places like Rygate were that you could turn it on when the sun didn't shine and the wind didn't blow. And
That's
the rivers were frozen.
Yeah, that's what I meant by a steady output. And yes, you are correct that take the last couple of weeks, it's been fairly cold. Power market price is fairly high. A plant like this tends to chug along in a steady way in conditions like that and not fluctuate as much. No, that's fair. Yeah.
Okay, Senator Bray.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Smith. Good to see you again. I wanted to check in on, I'm just interested that in talking about the price that you referred to, ancillary benefits like that it supports another industry, which seems like, across, it seems like bringing a cross subsidy in as a positive feature. And so I'm surprised. I mean, I would think as a purchaser, as an obligated purchaser of power, you would never want to say that you've been sort of tied to delivering on some sort of social mission for another industry. That does. I'm trying to figure out why that would be part of the argument from your point of view.
No, that's fair. In general, you're correct, sir, that is our goal, to find power, or when we have a renewable energy standard in the state, so find increasingly renewable power to meet our customers' requirements, but at the lowest cost we can. Yes. The reason I brought up those other impacts and benefits is because they seem to me like legitimate, credible reasons why, frankly, you all or the state looking as a whole, not just electric customers, might want to support an in-state power plant like that. Yeah, and frankly, my state of mind entering today was recalling last year and the progress that the bill made. My state of mind was that was generally how folks were looking at it. Yeah.
I think what we have are some new committee members, and we did a lot of work on renewable energy last year that they were not part of.
Right.
So we're doing a lot of catch up.
Yeah. Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
So this is a standard offer. This is how it's going to, it's part of a standard offer program. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. It is a very uniquely targeted one, but yes, sir.
Right. Yeah. And so that means that GMP is obligated to purchase this power.
That's correct. GMP would be the largest. We'll walk through actually one amendment that addresses this, but yes, GMP would be by a substantial amount the largest purchaser of the output. Yes.
Okay. And all right. So thanks. I don't want to get stuck there, but it just seems as though I don't know that I've ever heard GMP talk about accepting a higher price in the marketplace by virtue of sort of social economic benefits for another industry in the state before. And the question that we were discussing a little bit in the last few days was if we were, and that cost is going to come out of every ratepayer's pocket. So it's you know, we're making a decision on other people's bills for a decade to come. And I think that's what's bringing some concern into the room again. And although that's ratepayer dollars, not our dollars being expended, I think it seems like a fair question. If you wanted to mobilize roughly $10 million of money, would you not consider, is this the most cost-effective way to support that industry if you agree to the social goal of supporting that industry in that part of the state? And that's, I think, sort of where we left off by the end of the other day.
Okay, I think just for clarity though, we have required utilities to buy not the cheapest power for as long as I have been in this body in order to advance social goals, which was climate change and the development of renewable energy. So this is part of that entire effort. If it's what we want to do is a decision or under what terms, but this is not the only place that we have required higher than market purchases in order to achieve other social goals.
Right.
I believe the old coal-fired plants were the cheapest.
Right. Can I respond to that just very briefly? And so I agree and understand, and standard offer has been useful for sort of priming the pump, bringing new technologies on, advancing the state's work towards a cleaner portfolio. There is a point at which, though, I would say, when is it appropriate to retire any particular resource, you know, because it might be succeeded by another resource that is equally clean, but less costly. And
that's part of what we can investigate and see if we can find suggestions as to how to do that. And one that I think we've heard, and I know we heard last year, the advantage to this one is it's available all the time. Solar is very available in the summer, not so much in the winter. Wind has been very controversial, and we have some issues with it, but the wind doesn't always blow. So, and there's other things coming on the market in the area of wind, but they're out of state. Senator Pearson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Doug, nice to see you again. If Rygate goes offline, is it a big problem for GMP in terms of power, in terms of costs, in terms of meeting environmental goals?
A big problem might be overstating it. I mentioned earlier some of the positive features, including the chair was just referring to now, we'd lose that steadiness and a diversity of technology. Big problem. I'm not sure if I'd go that far, honestly. We have ambitious goals, as you know, in the Renewable Energy Standard, which over time are going to take quite a lot of attention and effort and portfolio building. This is not huge. The Rygate plant in or out is noticeable in that realm, but it's not huge, like a massive hole in our ability to progress toward those requirements, sir.
All right. Thank you.
So Doug, why don't we let you do your presentation that you came prepared to do?
Okay.
Okay.
Very good. All right. So recalling the, I'll be working from a couple of things. One is the handout on your committee page. I don't recall the exact name of the document, but
I've got one and it says edits and it was under your name on the committee page. Is that?
Does it begin at the top, proposed edits to S1 offered by, et cetera?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it
that's the one.
says by you. Is
That's
there
the one.
another one? I think Luke has one, draft 4 is, and that says the working group. I think that's the most up to date.
Okay. I believe as of, I don't know, 2 hours ago,
Yeah.
I believe that I had accurately incorporated into the proposed edits document the helpful input of Mr. Martland, and I hope I have not blown that. If something else has been appeared in the last, I don't know, half
No,
hour.
I think
hour,
this one, I
could have
think
missed it.
this is it. So it might be better to work off of Luke's. Are you proposing an edit to the one that Luke has given us?
Now, the reason I'm proposing to work from the document I mentioned is that I find it, and you might, a bit easier to follow the context of the edit. Like if I give a phrase that's to change,
Okay,
this version has the paragraph around it. That's all.
okay, we'll work from your document.
And we could switch, but that was my intent.
Okay.
Is it gives a little bit more context. I was trying to imagine you following it, honestly.
Okay,
Okay, so the first one, edit number 1 is that's located, well, it's the first one in the proposed edits document, and it is in the bill S1. I believe it's at page 2, line 2, if you wanted to follow the broader context. Okay, and
it is number 2. We don't have lines here. Okay, just tell us what this edit does.
fair enough. So this edit, basically, the core essence of this, of the current legislation and PPA that's in place now, and I believe the intent of the subsequent one being discussed now is to have the Vermont utilities, including GMP, purchase all the output of the Rygate plant for a period of time, and through the so-called facilitator. And this language here is basically intended to just clarify that point and to support a later point in the component of the bill. I believe it's section D7, which allows the plant's output to be dispatched. That basically means not necessarily producing at its maximum output at all times. By defining this edit here, defining the requirement as the actual output of the plant, rather than a fixed number of megawatt hours, the goal is to harmonize with that later section B7, which allows the plant, D7, which allows the plant's output to be dispatched or reduced sometimes, and that's a good thing for customers.
Okay, and that's, we talked about in the summer when you don't need that, it can be
Spring and fall.
moved back. Okay,
That's right. Mr. McNamara talked about that briefly, and I would
Yeah.
I'd support what he said, but examples of this are, yeah, on a spring day, if the plant is coming back from, I don't know, a maintenance outage, if power prices are really low, maybe it makes sense to wait a few days to start it up. Or maybe in a mild period when hydroelectric and solar are really producing strong in the market, price of power is low, much lower than the fuel expense to run the output. Perhaps we can reduce output a little bit during those times, and the PUC would work out the specific terms, but I say it's for the benefit of customers, because if and when this dispatching can occur, the idea is that it will benefit customers who basically pay for the value or the price of this power purchase agreement, and they benefit for the market value of the power in the ISO New England market.
okay,
I said that a little bit short, but is that helpful?
that's helpful.
Okay.
Okay, let's keep going on this.
Fair enough. Okay. The second one, edit 2, is located, I believe, on page 2, also a bit further down in the bill. And this one simply changes it's I think of it as a clarity or cleanup edit, and it basically the original language here, the part that refers in the strikeout to electricity supplied by and to its customers. The issue is that that language might be interpreted to mean that when Vermont utilities receive through this power purchase agreement the output of the Rygate plant, and that includes power and renewable energy certificates, this language might be interpreted to mean that utilities can't resell those renewable energy certificates. Our proposed edit basically is intended to allow, like for many of our other renewable sources, the ability to allow sales of renewable energy certificates if there's a good market price out there. And if that happens, that creates significant revenues that are credited back to our electric customers. And the reason the language, I think, is needed or is wise is if GMP or a Vermont utility sells renewable energy certificates from a plant like this, we do that, we can't claim that volume of power as renewable serving our customers. This language gives a bit more flexibility, and I apologize for my barking dog.
That's fine. Okay.
Just
think
a
we can
moment,
keep-
I'm getting
but-
to the next one.
Yeah, well, let's keep going because
Right. Okay. The third edit, this starts on page 3 of the bill, and really the last two edits, the third and fourth, are in the spirit of something I led with. It's modernizing a couple of the terms here to reflect the current power market environment and the products and services that a power plant like Rygate can provide, okay? And to also make sure that the plant's operating for the benefit of our electric customers to the extent possible. So the first, edit 3, energy and capacity was in the statute, and those were and are key output of a plant like Rygate. But in the current market, renewable energy certificates or credits and attributes, along with potentially some other products and services in the ISO New England market that are possible by a plant that can provide firm output and has a firm fuel supply behind it. These are also things that may have value into the utilities and their customers in the future. So this edit at D4 is basically just an expansion to allow additional products and services that may be able to provide value for Vermont electric customers. And this edit here, it basically clarifies that in setting the PPA price, the factors that the commission considers in setting the price should include all of the products and services that the utilities will receive from the plant. And it fits pretty well with the fourth and final set of edits. The fourth one, maybe a little trickier to see. It's in section F of, or to section F of the statute. And what it would add is a new number 1 that basically defines what the Vermont retail electric providers receive from the output from the plant, not just energy and capacity, but the same other products and services that I mentioned. So it basically makes edit 3 and 4 are basically meant to go together.
Okay.
And I think I have one more area. And so also in edit 4, this is in item subsection F, F3. The language basically clarifies that it allows the possibility that if the plant, if the commission finds that it's appropriate to allow the Rygate plant to retain some of the either renewable energy credits or other market services as part of a power purchase agreement, this edit basically guides the commission to reduce the price that's paid to reflect those products or services that are
Okay.
kept by the plant. It's basically a flexibility provision.
Okay, Doug, I'm going to apologize because we got you distracted on other topics, but as you said, about an hour ago, this whole amendment that's been being worked out by different folks with Luke got posted to the website. The committee hasn't had a chance to even see that. So I think I'd love to have time for Luke to walk us through the whole thing. And I've got 2 more witnesses, so I'm going to try and move it very quickly through and then see if we can get Luke while we've got him to walk us through it. Senator Bray.
Thank you. Just a very quick question. Mr. Smith, if in terms of the renewable attributes, is that 175,000 megawatt hours times roughly 6 cents the value of those attributes?
The market value of those attributes, that is what they could be sold for, is significantly less than that. In short, the RECs from this plant, the best market for them is Connecticut Class 1. That's been the most lucrative, and that the prices for those RECs in the last few years have ranged from as low as 1 cent per kilowatt hour to as high as, I'm going to say, around 4 cents per kilowatt hour. And it's market supply and demand, sir, that they fluctuate noticeably.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm going to move us on to Commissioner Schneider, who got laid over from last week because we ran out of time. So Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Great.
And there you go. It's
Okay. Thank you,
okay.
Madam Chair. if assuming you're seeing and hearing me appropriately enough.
Yes, we are.
And I think I can be relatively brief, but also happy to take your questions and try to be helpful there. So for the record, Michael Snyder, Commissioner, Forest, Parks, and Recreation. FPR, I appreciate the chance to speak to S1 here. The department has what I would describe as a relatively narrow but very important lane, if you will, in this bill and this issue. We're not the lead agency for the administration. Obviously, this is cross-cutting from energy and ratepayer issues to renewability. But so our lane, I should also acknowledge again, of course, Fish and Wildlife Commissioner Porter and his folks have a role through the certificate of public good that requires Fish and Wildlife notification. That's an ongoing role. You've heard a bit about that, and would defer to Commissioner Porter there. But certainly our piece in this is to address and to do so in a supporting way the role of the Rygate Power Station in the local landscape of forests and the forest economy. So that's it. Our point here is that the facility, such as it is, and as so, it plays an important role in supporting forests, forest landowners, loggers, truckers in particular, along the fuel supply chain. And at its best, it would help enable forest lands to remain forest lands, to provide a marketplace for good silviculture and stewardship of the land for production of goods and services, consistent with other state policies and state laws. And so, and in a time of transition and turmoil in the forest economy, which we've spoken about some members have heard more in other committees, policy committees, et cetera. But so the phrase lighthouse in a storm is one we've used. And so we would support the renewal of the power purchase agreement here on that basis, that whereas the facility plays that role, I'd dig in a little further and say, well, what does that mean? If much like we'd be kind of protecting the facility against fluctuations in power prices, I think it's important to consider protections for the suppliers and being able to supply fuels, a renewable land-based fuel source with possibilities for improvement, like to ensure that that can be delivered, and the costs of producing, and especially when we're asking them to do so in a thoughtful and careful way on the land, that their costs of producing and delivering the fuel are also reasonable. And that needs to be, there should be some protection there as well. I think that's why the language from S190 made reference to kind of a pointer to the PUC to consider the environmental and economic sustainability of the arrangement. And I'm eager to have that, both of those provisions be considered for that reason. So in short, we support it because of the role it plays, and would look to along the way to make sure it's a level playing field with respect to other states, with respect to other fuel sources and prices, and to make the very best of our ability to use such a wood burning facility in the best way possible in support of, again, our interest: healthy forests, healthy forest communities, healthy forest economy.
Okay, any questions, Senator Hardy?
You sound so excited, Senator Cummings. Commissioner, I was scrolling through the various drafts. Thank you for being with us today.
Of course.
And I believe there was some language put in the bill, either through an amendment or maybe it's in the original draft, about forest harvest practices. And I can't find it. And maybe this is a question for Luke, but do you know what I'm talking about? And were you involved in that language?
Yeah, I think I was just attempting to reference that from the previous iteration, that there was a directive to consider, again, this sort of environmental and economic sustainability of the fuel supply. So one would be to say, well, how does the fuel supply, the wood, get here? And what's in place to ensure that that's done well? I think that's fair, as is my point about the economics of that fuel supply. And those two things, importantly for me, are tied. As state forester, I would say we need to have, we can't ask people to do a great job on the landscape at a loss. And that's only putting them into a corner. and it's bad for both the environment and the economy. So yes, we were involved in requesting that language, that there ought to be, so efficiency of the plant, ways to capture the waste heat, as you've been talking about, as well as the sourcing. And how does that happen, and how do we pass along the subsidy, if you will, to the people who supply the fuel?
Mhm.
Okay, but
Both
we
of them.
also, there is language in there, because I remember the discussion
Yes.
last year about following good forest management practices. We had some testimony the other day. The company actually has a forester. I believe Fish and Wildlife has a role in this, in habitat.
Yes, that's
This
right.
is not you just don't go in and clear cut.
And I have a second question for the commissioner. So I got some information from somebody. So many people have reached out to us about this bill, so I can't remember who it was, but was talking about the trees that are harvested, and the portions that are used in the plant are the tips and the branches, and that the full logs are often used for something else. Is that accurate? And can you explain that sort of partnership of the two uses of the logs?
Sure, I'll try. I appreciate the question, because there is a lot of a lack of clarity, to put it mildly, on all of these things, and because it varies. And so I'd begin with, there's a phrase people say, well, it's biomass harvesting. There's no biomass harvesting, not hereabouts. There's harvesting, and then we'd like to think based on a plan, based on sound silvicultural principles and operational constraints, et cetera. But if we could accept that and assume that, a harvest involves cutting trees and then saying, we'd like to think with good intent and purpose. And then for any given tree, though, you want to optimize, given the work involved in taking a tree down and removing it from the woods or portions thereof, you optimize. So if the tree has great value for veneer or saw timber, high end, then you want to maximize, and you take that, whatever could qualify for that product, you put that in one pile. Then you've got branches and tops and tips, as you say, that cannot be made into that. So those would be removed in certain applications, and then that gets put into the chip pile. And in between, you might have some full bowls of trees that don't make the grade, literally, for higher value products, and they might go into the chip pile too. So what the plant burns is it's capable of burning all of the above. And then there's a mix of what comes to them from various sources, and it's mixed sourcing. And this is in contrast to, say, many like a pellet facility that would use specific bole wood, not whole trees, or say some of the heating plants, the district heating plants that use clean bole wood as opposed to whole tree chips. And that's really kind of the difference, is a power station like this is able to take whole tree chips, which could be branches, leaves, needles, bark, and wood of various types, or it can take pure wood. And indeed, they get a mix of all of the above. I hope that helps. It's just, there's not one size fits all, and a wood-fired electric facility takes what are considered whole tree chips that could be from anywhere in the tree, and is often heavy to branches and tops, because you want to maximize or optimize the value of the other products that might be within a growing tree.
Okay, great, thank you. I
Sure.
love to hear you talk about trees. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Bray.
Thank you, Commissioner Snyder. A quick question. So back from the Biomass Energy Development Working Group days, working with Bill Keaton, one of the things we talked about was the value of leaving behind slash, tips, needles, etc. And
Right.
so what's the current state of the art in terms of how much needs to be left behind in terms of maintaining the nutrients and carbon in the forest?
Excellent point. It's great concern. And I hope you know that work you all did those many years ago was not for naught. Among other things, we turned it and some subsequent legislation, I think the energy bill in 2012, perhaps. I've been here a long time now. We created the voluntary harvesting guidelines to protect forest health. And that stemmed from that work, or those concerns. And in that set of guidelines, we have created, based on the scientific literature, as it exists, And that is to say, quite a range of findings out there with regard to whole tree removals depleting site capacity. It's very hard to study. Soils are notoriously variable, high volume, and it's hard to show cause and effect. So there's, as I like to say, absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence. And so despite that mixed landscape out there on findings so far, we have developed a set of guidelines for retention, say in whole tree harvesting, of how many trees to leave behind that are standing alive, standing dead. We want to recruit standing dead and down dead wood in the forest. And so we have guidelines for suggestions for how much of that stuff, of what dimension, at what spatial arrangement to be left behind, recognizing that, it only stands to logic that you can only go to the well so many times. You continue to remove organic material, nutrients, et cetera, without putting anything back. That's not sustainable. So that's the concern that has been voiced for years about whole tree harvesting. And in an abundance of caution, we provide approaches to retain standing, live, dead, down wood, and a variety of diversity of species and size classes. So the guidance exists, folks use it, and I think we're learning more and more how to do it. And we've used some state lands harvesting to demonstrate different levels of retention and to try to track the economics of doing so. What are you foregoing if you're not taking everything out of the woods in the short term? We wanted to be able to address people's concerns, even on the operation and economic side. So we've done a lot of work with it, Senator. We have good guidance, and through current use and through voluntary means, we're seeing more and more folks employing these techniques. And we're also seeing changes in the operations. I mean, whole tree harvesting allows mechanized harvesting. It means it's safer, not using a chainsaw, the most dangerous tool out there. And so that's really important for the workforce. And the technology of equipment and harvesting equipment has also advanced. And so there's cut to length approaches that allow the same level of mechanized harvesting. It's safe and efficient, but to do so without having necessarily to pull the whole tree out of the woods. And finally, on the subject of whole tree, to reflect the interest about cautions and protections against site depletion of nutrients and organic material, is that most harvesting operations now, again, reflecting Senator Brady's concern, bringing whole trees out for the operational efficiencies and the safety, and then processing on the landing into different sorts, we call them, for different product types, and then taking tops and branches by grapple load or trailer load back into the woods on the skid trails in particular, to provide some protective flotation and erosion control, but also just to disperse that material back in the woods. It's very common now. That it was not a common practice at all during the BioE group, for example. And that's another kind of common practice, is to, I'll admit to you, it makes my head spin when I think about the energy involved in taking it all the way out of the woods and then taking it all the way back into the woods. But that is how it's happening, more increasingly.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Any other questions for Commissioner Snyder? Okay, Senator McDonald.
So you're testifying on the genuine need to find markets for forest products, and that's the limit of your testimony?
Well, I think I've answered a bunch of questions. I'll be clear. My testimony is in support of S1 because of its supporting role of the facility in providing a critically important market for low-grade wood in a critically important time. That's it, Senator. That's it. I support
So
the
you
bill.
have no opinion on the affordability to the ratepayers in order to acquire this subsidy. That's not your area of testimony.
Right. I may have opinions, but it'd be inappropriate for me to weigh in with those. Mine are on
Thank
the
you.
other side. The economic viability of the people who the land and the people who supply the fuel. That is
Thank
my
you
area.
so much for sticking to what was appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on.
Not really sure what to make of that.
Don't worry about it.
Kind of hard not to, Madam Chair.
Senator McDonald,
You can't unring the bell.
you can talk to him afterwards. I'm going to try and move us along. We've got one more witness, and then I want, while we've got Luke with us, to have him kind of walk through this amendment that we got some edits to. So our next witness is Rachel Smolker from Biofuel Watch. Rachel, welcome. And we
Thank
just
you.
need you to introduce yourself for the record so we can put a voice with the name.
Great,
This is all recorded.
right. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. I'm Rachel Smolker and I live in Heinsberg. And I'm co-director of Biofuel Watch, which is an organization that has been working since 2007 opposing large-scale bioenergy. We work with grassroots communities. We also have worked through the UN Conventions on Climate and Biodiversity, nationally and internationally with allies around the world. And I have been serving as a reviewer for the IPCC reports, including reports on the land sector in the last year or two. And we work with a wide variety of allies, and including in a campaign that we are calling Cut Carbon Not Forests, which is in alliance with the Dogwood Alliance down in the Southeast and with the Natural Resources Defense Council. And I do invite you to visit their websites and see what resources they have available on the subject of biomass. So the first thing I wanted to do is just talk a little bit about some of the breaking news from today. Today, some 500 scientists published a letter which was directed to President Biden, the director of the European Union, and Japan and South Korean leaders. And just to give you a brief quote, in recent years, there's been a misguided move to cut down whole trees and divert large portions of stem wood for bioenergy, releasing carbon that would otherwise stay locked up in forests. The result is a large initial increase in carbon emissions, creating a carbon debt, which increases over time as more trees are harvested. Regrowing trees and displacement of fossil fuels may eventually pay off this carbon debt, but regrowth takes time the world does not have to solve the climate problem. As numerous studies have shown, this burning of wood will increase warming for decades to centuries. That is true even when the wood replaces coal, oil, or natural gas, signed by 500 scientists. And there are many other similar letters circulating around over the time that I've been working on this issue. Another piece of news from today was that one of the major wood pellet manufacturers, which is producing pellets that are exported to Europe, was fined $2.1 million for air pollution emission violations at their pellet plants. So that's just a little bit of news from the world on biomass and bioenergy. And I think it's really important to just keep focused on the fact that the idea of burning biomass for energy was initially put forward as a solution to climate change. But the science is very clear. There is mountains of peer-reviewed literature, and I'm happy to share with you pages and pages of resources on this. It is very clear that burning wood for power is inefficient and worsens carbon emissions. It is not a solution to the problem of climate change, and it threatens forests. While we know that allowing forests to grow is in fact one of the better ways we have of sequestering carbon. Most of these biomass facilities emit considerably more carbon, depending on the details, than a coal plant per unit of energy that is generated. And yes, it's possible new trees will grow, but as we know, trees can take hundreds of years to grow, and it can take minutes to burn. So we don't have that kind of time. One of the issues I have in particular with keeping the Rygate facility, grandfathering it in for another decade, is that we know that energy technologies and policies are changing fast in light of climate change and recognition of the problem, and in light of technological breakthroughs that are happening. The price of solar energy and other renewables has gone down very dramatically in the last few years. Energy storage technologies are coming up, and Vermont is currently in the process of revising and looking at its clean energy plan. It's also got a Global Warming Solutions Act, and I believe that the Renewable Energy Standard will probably be revisited within the next few years. And all of these policies will, if we grandfather the Rygate facility, an antiquated, dirty, polluting, forest damaging facility for a decade, we will be stuck with that in our policy world for the next decade. And I think that would be a real shame for the state of Vermont to have to burden the ratepayers with paying for something like that when that money could be used and put to much better use, cleaner use. So that's one of the main objections that I have with this 10-year extension on the life of this plant. The other thing is that, in general, biomass power is very expensive. It is not an industry that can survive without subsidies. And I would suggest to people to look at a report that was done by the Partnership for Policy Integrity in 2017 that looked at the state of Maine. And basically with subsidies and tax credits and grants to that industry, they found that over $250 million had been provided to the industry, and yet it was still unable to compete or prevent closures and bankruptcies. And that is honestly the kind of thing that we see all over the world happening with this industry. It cannot survive without the subsidies and supports. It's simply not viable otherwise. Burning biomass is very polluting, as I think other people have mentioned, but I think one of the key things is, of course, the particulate pollution. And in my experience, what we are told by the industry is that they filter out some proportion, and sometimes it'll be a very high proportion. It could be 90% of the particulates. And this depends on what kinds of particulates you're talking about. But the bottom line is, even that remaining small proportion, 10% of a facility that is burning so much wood, is a very large amount of particulate. It may only be a small portion from that facility, but it's a very large amount of particulates to be putting into the air where people are trying to breathe. And there are many other kinds of pollutants that are emitted from these facilities. So again, I would ask, why would you ask ratepayers to pay a higher price for energy that is polluting the air? Biomass is bad for the forest. It just is. And I know, that there's every single facility I have ever looked at, we have been told we only burn waste and residues, whatever that means, or tips and branches, twigs and bark left over from harvesting of logs. And while there's not, it's not clear that that never happens. There are many, many cases where people have ground truthed that. It's simply the case. In the southeast of the United States, ground truthing, they'd been told that it was waste and residue. They found trucks going in and out with whole trees. If you take a look at any of these facilities, you will see, including McNeil, you will see, I haven't seen Rygate, but you will see big piles of whole trees. They are what are called low-grade wood, but they are trees. And so what happens is that the harvests are more intense. They're intensified because there is now a market for much of this other material. So I think it's really key to do the ground truthing and see exactly what is happening at these harvests. It means going out to the logging sites and following the trucks and seeing what's going on and not just taking anybody's word for it, honestly. That's been my experience. In the southeast, we found that they were harvesting old growth forests, clear cutting them for to supply to pellet plants, even though they were, advertising that they were just using waste and residues. And we've seen the same thing happen in other places as well. So it's a real, I don't think that it should be just taken on face value that there's, the other issue is this, is that anybody who uses a wood stove knows that you cannot really heat your house and run your wood stove on leaves and twigs and needles and bark. It doesn't burn well, it doesn't burn cleanly, and it doesn't produce much heat. You need good quality wood. So I think that's important to be really questioning that. Another key question that has been in my mind about Rygate is that we were told that it burns 250,000 tons of wood a year by Dylan the other day. And my question is that a dry weight? And because most places that that I've seen, the wet weight of wood is about twice the dry weight, roughly. And many of these facilities cannot burn wet wood. They need it to be dried. So what's removed from the forest is actually twice the weight of what's burned in the facility. So I think this is a key question that people should be asking. Are we burning 250,000 tons and actually harvesting 500,000 tons, or what? This is something, again, that has been a common problem with many of these facilities that we've addressed. The other problem that we've seen many, many times is that when you map out all of the different facilities that say they have a 60-mile radius around the facility from which they're harvesting, and you put all of the different competing places that are saying that all onto a map, you find that actually they overlap. So there may be multiple different biomass plants, there may be multiple different heating, residential and commercial heating, or pellet manufacturers, et cetera, that are all have their woodsheds are overlapping. So the pressure on the land is not just from that one facility, it's from multiple facilities. So again, this is, I think, a key question. How many other entities in the state of Vermont are also taking wood from the same 60-mile radius? And we know that within a 60-mile radius, not all 60 miles of that is harvestable. And for a facility that's been operating since 1992, taking 250 or however many thousands of tons of wood for that many years, and now would do so for another 10 years, that's a lot of pressure in a given area. I think I will skip over a little bit about the issues around the claims of carbon neutrality. The science is very clear on this. It is not carbon neutral. The important point is that this was the entire impetus behind the origins of the biomass industry. It is the reason why it is called renewable energy, right? Is that we are pretending against the volume of science that contradicts it, that there are no carbon emissions from burning biomass for power. And that is just simply not the case. It is not renewable energy. It should not be subsidized alongside of other kinds of renewable energy the way that it is. And there's a huge literature, as I said. I have some questions in my mind. I don't know the answers, but I think that people should be asking these questions about whether the market for low-grade wood actually is effective in keeping forest as forest. How much are people really making for that? Is that really playing a key role in their decision not to develop their land? Because in the surveys that I've seen, I think that I would really raise questions about that. I've heard over and over again that the market for low-grade wood is what keeps forest as forest, but I would have really, I think that needs to be unpacked. I don't buy it. I don't think that landowners are making a decision not to develop their land because they can sell some low-grade wood off of it. But anyway, that's not my area of expertise, but I think it's some questions that need to be raised. The other thing is,
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up because we're running out of time, and I need to have our attorney, who may only be available to us today, to walk us through the proposed changes. So
that's great. If you can just give me 30 seconds, I will wrap up.
Give you at least that.
Thank you. So my last point is just that I think that there are many better uses for the wood. Rygate is an inefficient, dirty, polluting facility, and we have so many other better uses. We heard 13% of the total wood harvest from the state that's going into producing a pittance of energy, and we're asking people to subsidize that.
Okay,
Thank you.
but you are not opposed to harvesting wood?
No,
I'm just
not
looking
opposed
at
to
your
cutting trees.
background.
No, I just think this is one of the most wasteful ways to use wood that's harvested.
Okay, and I think we can get into what goes up and what gets burnt. Any questions for Ms. Smolin right now? Okay, thank you. That's
You're
been helpful. And committee, Luke is here with us, so I'm going to ask him, and we've got on the website, we do have testimony from Luke, and I'm hoping this is the draft with, my understanding is some corrective language that the various parties have asked to put in, but I'm not sure about that. So why don't you walk us through it?
Good afternoon, everybody. Luke Marland, Director of Ledge Council. I am sorry, Madam Chair, I have a hard stop at 4:25 to go to another meeting.
Okay,
As far as I know, I can certainly come back another day, including next week. So let's just
okay.
assume that's
So what
possible and
time am
schedule
I?
accordingly.
Okay, let's
We can
get
start.
as far as we
Yep.
can. Yep.
Okay. So to all the members of the committee, this committee amendment really was started as a way to pull together various proposals from stakeholders. So you haven't seen it before today, and it's not meant to be a final polished document. It was meant to pull together all their different suggestions, put in a document that you could look at. And the idea was that it might speed up the process and make it easier to look at everyone's assorted proposals. It's only a beginning. Yes.
I'm sorry, Luke, what are we looking at? What's the number of the draft? There are a bunch of things on the website, so.
It
just-
is crafted as a committee amendment, and it says in the upper left-hand corner, draft number 4-S1, date
I think it's the only thing
2/10/21.
under Luke's name. if-
Okay, 2:10 and it's at 12:29 PM.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. What I was going to say is it's only a starting point because since it was put up, there have been suggested changes to what you're looking at and also additions. So understand it's a starting point, it's a work in progress. Doug Smith did a really, really good job of incorporating the beginning of these amendments into the actual bill. And I would start in a similar fashion. I'd suggest you pull up the actual bill, S1, whether you have that in front of you in paper or on the screen, and I'll tell you what the first three amendments do. And Doug did that very, very well. And then I'll go on and ask you to look at the amendment and we'll go through some of the other language. As always, stop me if anything's unclear. So the first amendment is to looking at S1, looking at the bill itself in subsection A, and that's the definition section. And if you look at A2, which in the bill's on page 2, what this amendment would do is change how that subsection reads as follows. Baseload renewable power portfolio requirement means the actual output of baseload renewable power, etc. So that's what the amendment would do. Takes out some language and puts in that new phrase. And I think he described the rationale behind that. And by the way, the policy reasons or the pros and cons of any of these changes, I will leave up to the other witnesses. Any questions about that? Going on to B. So we're still on page 2 of the bill. And B is one of the most important parts of the bill. It basically says that under the current language, starting in 2012, that the electricity supplied by each distribution utility to its customers shall include their pro rata share of the energy from the Rygate facility. And what the second amendment does is it makes the following changes. On line 10 of page 2 of the bill, it deletes the words the electricity supplied. It deletes on line 11 the words to its customers and the word include. And so how those sentences will read would be notwithstanding subsection, and there's a cross reference of this title, commencing November 1st, 2012, each Vermont retail electricity provider shall purchase the provider's pro rata share. And then the language continues. Any questions about that amendment, the second amendment? Proceeding on to page 3 of the bill. The third amendment modifies the language in 4 on lines 17, 18, and 19. And remember, this language is the various criteria that's used by the PUC in setting the price. So everything you see on page 3 of the bill is relevant to how the PUC sets the price for the power. Amendment number 3 will modify what's in 4. And as a result of that amendment, number 4 would read as follows. The relationship of the availability of energy, comma, capacity, comma, renewable energy credits and attributes, comma, and other market products and services from the proposed plant, etc. And this language about renewable energy credits and attributes and other markets, products, and services, you will see it later on also. It's a phrase that's repeated more than once. And it's meant to capture RECs, it's meant to capture attributes, and it's meant to capture any other market-based kind of credit or attribute that might be traded that's developed in the future, but that we're not dealing with right now. So it's meant to have that flexibility to include other types of market-based products that might be developed over the next 10 years. Any questions about that? Okay.
No, don't see any.
So now I'm going to ask you to take out or look at the actual amendment, because the next amendment is adds a lot of text to the bill. So it's something new and different. And what it does, if you look at the actual amendment, the fourth instance of amendment, which is towards the bottom of page 1, in the current law, in the current statute, there's a subsection F, and this amends that subsection F. The bill doesn't, but the amendment would add all of this into the bill. Reading at the bottom of page 1 of the amendment itself, it states, F, with respect to a plant used to satisfy the baseload renewable power portfolio requirement, in other words, RYGATE. And then if you flip to page 2, 1, Vermont retail electricity providers shall receive all of the output of the plant, including the electricity, renewable energy credits and attributes, and other market products and services. So this is new language, and it's saying that the Vermont distribution utilities get the power, the RECs, and any other products that may be developed over the next 10 years. Once again, it's that same phrase we just talked about a few moments ago.
Okay, Senator Hardy has a question.
Thank you. So under current law, they just get the power. They don't get the RECs and the other things.
Negative. Under current law, if you look down page 2 of the amendment, you'll see on line 9, you'll see there's a 2 that's crossed out, and then there's a 3.
Yep.
So under current law, it says any tradable renewable energy credit attributable to the electricity purchase shall be transferred to the retail electricity providers. So under current law, the RECs should go to the distribution utilities. My understanding is there have been some exceptions to that. My understanding, and you should confirm this with another witness, that to update some of the pollution control devices on the plant, there was an agreement reached where they could keep some of those RECs or some of the value of those RECs to pay off the costs of those upgrades. So normally the RECs go to the retail electricity providers. My understanding is there have been some exceptions to that.
Okay.
And I think someone just signed on to maybe give some background on that.
Okay, well, I'm going to move us along. I'm
Okay.
definitely going to give the Rygate people a chance. And I think what I'm going to ask the committee to do is write your questions down, and we'll get them to the folks that represent Rygate so that they can, when we have them in, they can answer them.
Madam
Okay,
Chair,
Senator Pearson, yeah.
I'm sorry to bulldoze over your request, but I want to just make sure it's clear. And it's really a question for GMP. I believe the language we're looking at would allow GMP to sell those RECs. And so I want to just be sure, because that RECs are confusing and this language is a little confusing, but I don't know if Doug or Luke could just comment on that.
I'd leave that. I see Doug is still on. I'll leave it up to him. I don't know what their intent is. So,
Or
Mr.
retire them, I suppose, but.
Yeah, Mr. Pearson, I think you have it right, which is to say, I'm sorry, I don't have the language right up on my screen, but the
Yeah.
language you're talking about would, from our perspective, it is appropriate, and we've tried to reflect in that language with Mr. Martlin's help, the idea that a choice would be allowed. Vermont Utilities would be required to purchase all the output in its various forms from the plant. But having held that, frankly, if there was an attractive price in the renewable energy certificate market, it would allow us to sell some of those for the benefit, basically, of our electric customers, reduce their cost. Yes.
Okay. Senator Bray.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. So I just, since you told me that it was Class 1 Connecticut RECs that would be the applicable price, I looked it up while we were online, and if 750,000 megawatt hours is the average, then it's about $7.3 million worth of value in current REC pricing at 41.33. So just that we have some sense of, are we talking, pocket change or something more? And I don't know if you can verify that and get back to us if that sounds right to you.
I'd like to verify it because there was a distracting noise on my end. But to your basic point, it's not just pocket change, like 1% of the overall cost and payments involved in this transaction. The REC value and potential revenue could be a meaningful fraction. And as you just illustrated, in the short term, like this year, it is.
Okay, so that could be used to offset the cost, the higher cost of this power?
Yes, ma'am. And
Okay.
that, in short, it would flow through the retail
Okay.
electric rates or so-called power adjuster that Green Mountain Power has to the benefit of electric
right.
customers. That's
So it would not necessarily be I think a $10 million hit to rates has been thrown around. There are offsetting values there. I think that's what I'm hearing. Okay, Luke, we've got a hard stop, so I'm going to get you through, and then committee, let's get the questions together and we'll get them to Rygate and see what their answers are.
and let me charge ahead. I think I can cover most of this in the minutes remaining, and of course I can come back or follow up. So we're now looking at page 2 of the actual amendment. In the middle, it's just renumbering. Further down on lines 13 through 19, this is what we just talked about. It says, first of all, in current law that the RECs shall be transferred to the retail electricity providers. The new language on lines 13 through 19 says that unless the commission has approved the plant owner retaining some of those credits, and then if the commission, the PUC, does so, the price and cost paid by the retail electricity providers may be reduced based on the value of those credits retained. And that's what we just talked about. Proceeding on now to page 3 of the amendment. In the 5th instance of amendment, in the actual bill, there's language in subsection K, as in kilo, about a study, basically studying various ways to use some of the excess heat. And this would strike that and replace it with new language. Some of it's similar. I won't read through it all because of the time constraints, but it asks the owner of the Rygate plant to investigate the economic feasibility of utilizing the excess thermal energy. The owner reports on that investigation to the Department of Public Service, and then the Department of Public Service works with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development to examine what options there might be and how that heat might be used in a beneficial manner.
Would those be done before they got the,
No,
before they were
so-
permitted to go ahead, or is that done after they've been
Well,
permitted to go ahead?
the bill, even if you fold this amendment into the bill extends Rygate's operational life, as you know. And so this study is done after that already has been extended. It's not a precursor to getting that extension.
Luke, is there any legal reason why it has to be a 10-year extension?
Legally, no, I can't think of one off the top of my
Okay,
head.
so
I don't know if there's
we
a
could do a
policy reason.
shorter,
well,
okay.
legally, yes. I don't know about energy or
yeah,
economic factors. Yeah.
yeah, but just it's
Not
been
that I can
done
think of.
in 10-year steps. And there's proposals for other alternatives, but whether or not those other alternatives could be meshed in without having, could be a fairly heavy economic impact on a section of the state that never is much of an economy. If we could find a way to phase is what I'm thinking. So Senator Pearson.
Thank you. Luke, this change that mandates that the utilities get the RECs, in your mind, is that like today they have to pay a certain price for the power, and then I'm assuming if they wanted to buy the RECs, it would be on top of that.
They're already supposed to get the RECs. So under current
Yeah,
law,
but
they
we've
get the
heard-
RECs.
Yeah, but it's not, they're not required to. So I guess I'm wondering if it's an adder today and the new proposal makes it all part of the price, is there an economic impact? Because RECs are tricky and I wouldn't want to casually make this shift without
So
understanding it.
let me jump in because the clock is ticking. Yes,
Yeah,
RECs
you've got it.
are tricky, and you should absolutely hear from other witnesses about the language. But just to make clear, under current law, any REC attributable to the electricity purchased by the distribution utilities shall be transferred to the Vermont retail electricity providers. So under current law, they should be getting it. I told you about one exception for seems to be a valid reason. I don't know how they're used. I don't know if there's other exceptions, but so that's not a big change. The amendment makes that clear and then has the carve out to allow the PUC to determine if the REC should not go to the DUs and to, in essence, reduce their price if any of those stay with the Rygate operator.
And we have got Rex 101. I thought it was scheduled this week. It must be next week. But we will be getting a primer on Rex because they're beyond my pay grade. I think Senator Bray and Senator McDonald may understand them, but we will be getting that, and that would be a good time to, I think, get all the Rex questions out.
Madam Chair, can I make two quick points? Then
Yep.
I have to go. So number one, Senator Hardy, you'd asked about the forestry practices. That is an 8 in the bill. So there is language in the bill about that. Number two, this amendment does not include proposed changes to the bill back language. And that was from Fish and Wildlife. So they do have suggested changes to the bill back language in the bill.
Okay.
Those were not folded into the amendment. I just want to make that clear.
Okay.
Is there anything else before I run?
I'm not seeing anything. I think between Rex and tax policy, we're all ready for a break. Okay, thank you. Good luck with your next meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, committee, I may taking notes. If you get any questions that you have about Rygate, just send them probably to Faith, since she's not here to defend herself. We'll get them and get them out to Dylan and the owners so that we can have a very constructive kind of session, getting questions asked. Senator Bray, you have a
Yeah, just
question
my
statement?
apologies. On behalf, I have to go to the same meeting that Luke is going to.
Oh, okay.
So.
Okay, no, I think we are done in more ways
Okay.
than one today. We'll see everybody tomorrow.
Shall I end the live stream? I want to.
Yes, that's right. And the live stream. That's right. You're